So as long as it's fair, as long as it's voluntary, inequality is fine. Inequality is great. We want those who succeed to be more rewarded than those who destroy value. But in the sense of our current environment, we have really sinister inequality.
If everybody, if the water's flowing and everyone is benefiting, right, everyone's cup is filled, people are happy, right? They have better things to do than to line up outside of someone's house and threaten to chop their head off.
I don't think we should be setting up guillotines anywhere, and that's why I love Bitcoin. It's the peaceful revolution, right? But why do people want to set up these guillotines? Because they know the system isn't working.
It started to make a lot of sense to me that if we fixed money, we fixed so many problems in society. And so as a technology person, I was like, what should I be working on that's more important than this? There's nothing more important than this.
Welcome to the Tucson Bitcoin Podcast. Today I have on Michael Rectenwald, who is a prolific author, having written over 11 books. He was a former professor at New York University and is a frequent speaker at the Mises Institute. He is a voice of reason in a time of craziness, and I really appreciated this conversation as we really broke down the negative impacts of social media on society, positives around Bitcoin and money, talking about central banking, the whole gambit. But he has a really interesting and unique look at social media, so that's what we focused on a lot. Hope you enjoy. All right, we're recording. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. Good to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Alex. It's good to be here.
Sure. So I heard about you for the first time. I saw one of your tweets saying that you were going to go speak at the Mises Institute, and that's how I stumbled across you. I was like, oh, if you're speaking there, you have to be legit. And really enjoyed getting into some of your content and talks that you've done. I think you're a voice of reason in a time of insanity. So it's always good to hear. But yeah, you've had quite the progression. So you talked about being involved in kind of leftist Marxist thought earlier on in your career and kind of shifting more towards the libertarian side of things. What caused that shift for you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely shift from Marxism and leftism to classical liberalism or libertarianism. But the shift really took place. I was one of the early, quote unquote, victims, I guess, of cancel culture in the university system. And whenever the social justice fanatics and the rest of the left on and offline came after me for criticizing certain things in the university system and at NYU and across the country, all these crazy happenings. And this was before they've gotten even like 10 times worse. It just woke me up to what totalitarians they are. Yeah, they're little totalitarians. And when I saw the totalitarianism of the left, I had it with it almost immediately. And then I started to do some deep reading in Mises and Rothbard and others. Especially Mises, I found to be the best critic of socialism that I've seen. And to get to the heart of the problems with it. And I read, all over the place in Mises. And, I always had a libertarian bent. Even as a communist, I thought I was a libertarian communist, which it sounds like a contradiction, but there is such a strain within, within Marxist milieus. And so I always had a libertarian bent and never liked, the kind of dictatorial ambitions of some people on the left. And I hadn't really seen them come out so clearly until they turned their guns on me. And then I saw it very clearly.
Sure. Yeah, that unfortunately is a really common story that we're hearing a lot of kind of the mob attacking people, and I think it's a strange occurrence, because I think it's important for people to have conversations about things, to really dive into topics deeply, and like debate is not an unhealthy thing. And it seems like it kind of happens on the right and the left. And the nice thing about being of a libertarian persuasion is that you really belong to neither. And when I talk about the right, I'm talking about like very similar things that happen where the mob attacks, leftist speakers like Michael Moore in Utah, which really kind of baffled me, because I thought it was kind of a unique occurrence on the left. And then I watched one of his documentaries where he went to Utah, and it looked like the same thing as like Ben Shapiro speaking at a university or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that video, but I can believe it. I just think right now, though, we're dealing with a particular virulent strain of leftist ideology that's the dominant one by a long shot, and it's controlling every area of the culture now, including not just academia. It's way beyond that. I mean, we know where it's at everywhere. Corporate America, sports, of course, the media, social media. So, I've been trying to analyze just what this is about and why is leftism dominating, and just why, for example, are, these corporations going woke, and why is like Twitter, Facebook, Google, etc., why are they leftist? So, I just talked about that in a Mises talk called the Google election. And I try to explain what I think is going on. I've been coming at this from many, many different angles. I would keep trying to approach this problem, because I consider it to be a challenge intellectually and analytically, a problem, a challenge to figure out why these mega, billionaires are embracing socialism, in effect. It's very curious. It's a very curious development. And, I've given explanations for it. We can talk about that if you wish. But,
Sure.
Maybe later on down the road here.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of your talks about big tech being an extension of the government.
Yeah. I think it's a state apparatus. I mean, as I said in that talk, not only did they get their startup funding, for example, in the case of Google, from In-Q-Tel, which was a major, it's the CIA's venture capital firm, and not only get their startup funding, but they've had cash, major infusions from the military and intelligence agencies since their inception. So these are extensions of the state. So they're more interested in status functions primarily than they are in market functions. The market is just a subsidiary, auxiliary function of what they're about. Making money is just a bonus that goes on top of their real function, which is ideological. These are ideological state apparatuses.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about that. And one of the interesting conversations that's coming up in response is the argument that we should be regulating these tech companies as public utilities, which I think just kind of further solidifies.
This just solidifies their state. The state that become almost, adoptees of the state at that point. The problem was, as Mises pointed out, every time you intervene, it causes the need to intervene again. every time the state intervenes, it requires further interventions to fix the interventions that they had in the first place. And that's exactly what we're seeing. This is a market distortion because they were given all this head start by these huge cash infusions from the intelligence and military communities. They now have become, de facto monopolies. Now, I know they're not technically legal monopolies, but they're dominating the market in a way that's not natural. It is not a natural market function here that they are this predominant, and it has to do with their head start. I don't believe regulation is the key at all. In fact, I think the total deregulation is the key. So they should deregulate. First of all, they should have to, first of all, they should never have been given this kind of money to start. And secondly, they shouldn't be allowed to be basically arbiters of speech, of information, right now we're dealing with a kind of total propaganda and censorship regime that is, quite almost unparalleled in some ways. Because of the reach of digital media, the reach of this is more profound than anything you can do through pamphlets and just, state repression. It's all happening on a scale of nanobits, and it's permeating everything, and it can't be contained. This kind of propaganda and censorship is it's unparalleled in terms of its reach, not necessarily in terms of its severity. It's a kind of soft totalitarianism, but it is nonetheless totalitarian.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I debate a lot with my socialist friends on.
You got socialist friends, do you?
I do. It's hard not to have socialist friends.
These days, yeah. Otherwise, you don't have any friends.
Yeah, just my Twitter friends. But yeah, I debate with them on the idea. So it's really an interesting argument a lot of times that the government has created problems, and so we need to give them more power to fix problems. And that's generally the argument. So like the big one that I have is on the idea of Medicare for all. That's one that I argue for, and or not for, but against pretty frequently. I'm pretty with you on the deregulation. So yeah, the totalitarianism is pretty scary. So one of the things I think a lot of people are struggling with in 2020 is determining what is real from what is false, and it's almost impossible to do that.
Right. Because I said in Google Archipelago, my book, I said that what's happening is they're erecting a simulacrum, and it's displacing reality. And they're at, these digital Goliaths have erected a simulacrum in place, and so that the real crisis we have is a crisis of a metaphysics of truth, where we're in a crisis of we're in a deep epistemological crisis, post-truth epistemological aporia. We're in the deep throes of epistemological uncertainty, and even worse than uncertainty, lack of even possibility for seeming to be able to get a hold of a real metaphysics of truth.
So for the average person, what would you suggest for them in this environment?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on whether they've already been indoctrinated or not. If they're already indoctrinated, I mean, it's going to take radical deplugging and debriefing and, almost brain scrambling, because there have been people are right now, there's a huge segment of the population that's possessed ideologically. they're effectively possessed by ideology. And likewise, they can't see anything without that framework, and they see everything in terms of that framework. And they can't see certain things at all because the ideological frame prohibits it. Even the descrying or the perception of various phenomena are not possible. The ideological blinders are that powerful. So for those people, I would say, I don't know. I mean, how do you red pill somebody? I mean, and when I say red pilling, that's not turning them into a right winger. That's deplugging from the matrix of this ideological machinations that we're undergoing here. But for the others, I'd say just keep inoculating yourself with reading things outside of the paradigm that has been foisted on us. Keep reading about different perspectives. There are certain things that I find good inoculants. One of them is Nietzsche. Read some Nietzsche. Whether you agree with everything he has to say, it's a very good inoculation. And then, of course, the Austrian school is good. But for a deeper philosophical resistance to it, and this is the real resistance now, I would say, you need to read some Nietzsche, really. Because this whole bullshit about equality, that everything is about equality, when this isn't really about equality, this is an inversion of the social hierarchy. So, see, one of the things that I've been doing that none of the other critics from the academic realm have done was to tie the stuff that went on and is still going on in the academy to the larger agenda of what this is all about. The critical race theory and the demonization of whites and whiteness, the constant identity politicking, the way the university has turned into nothing but a ghetto of various identity politicking creeds, but it's all one creed, different elements vying for the most subaltern or subordinated status. It's all about inverting the hierarchy, but really what they want to do is, I think the whole bigger objective is to create the conditions under which the powers that be can rationalize the great destabilization of the what I guess, for lack of a better term, I would call middle class life, and the dramatic lowering of expectations for what's possible, so that they're trying to use race as a way of making a lot of people feel like, well, I don't deserve anything because I'm my tribe is guilty of these horrendous things of racism and on and on and on. I think this is a way of rationalizing the kind of debunking and the leveling that is being undertaken. This kind of leveling and dramatically lowering expectations, and not just expectations for income, expectations for rights about what we're allowed to do, whether we're allowed to move around in space, whether we're allowed to breathe without masks on, whether we are allowed to express opinions that aren't acceptable, and they have every which way to get rid of you if you do something wrong. I mean, through corporate, so I think that corporations and social media, these are all extensions of the state now. They're all they're all undertaking state functions of a new totalitarian regime that is interested in total control and abrogating our individual rights, lowering our economic expectations, et cetera, et cetera. I know that sounds pretty grim, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think the reality that we're in is pretty grim. And so one of the routes that I try and take, one place of respect I have for a lot of people on the left is their unique ability compared to the right. I mean, those are like bad ways to frame it, because they're both like focusing on silly things. But a lot of the left has a real ability to focus on real issues. They just present real terrible solutions to them. And so one of the routes that I try and go is addressing those issues and bringing libertarian ideas to them. So I believe racism is a real issue. I think identity politics are stupid, because, the idea that a black person should vote for Joe Biden because Kamala Harris is the vice president and she's black is like just as ignorant as saying that me as a white man should vote for Donald Trump because he's white and male and represents mine. And so I think there's some pretty big holes in the identity politics aspect of things on both the right and the left because they're both playing them. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to, these issues, it's just so unfortunate to watch people get wrapped up in things that are just like so meaningless because, renaming, like the establishment loves this stuff because it distracts from the real structural issues that are, it's way easier to rename
a street or a school or a building
than it is to create it.
Than it is to have a society in which wealth production is possible for everyone. In fact, I think that some of this stuff is being undertaken because because wealth production is being curtailed. The COVID lockdowns are not scientifically valid in terms of their efficacy with reference to the virus, but they sure have another function, and that is to debase the economic foundations of many people, not just business owners, but even just employees, because it's not only put a lot of people out of work, but it's made it impossible for people to get other work. Because there's, with the paucity of opportunities, I think it leaves people in a kind of state where they're almost ready and willing to welcome UBI, universal basic income, because after all, then at least I will have, my needs met, but within very constrained and delimited conditions.
Yeah. So it's a pretty grim future. Do you see what do you see as the ways that people can kind of fight back against it and opt out from it?
I'm thinking that see the thing is, you can't oppose this in a way that is like the opposition that's really behind it, and that is, you can't oppose it through collectivism because collectivism is the problem. So trying to become collectivist in opposing this only creates just another tribe, so you'll have just another tribe that's out there battling with the left, or you'll have a right-left tribalism, which is not the answer. I'm going to say that the assertion of rights is going to have to come at some point. The assertion of individual rights, because right now we're in serious danger of their abrogation. And that means that, we'll just accept that we don't have the right to travel without all these COVID restrictions or move about in space freely, that this is going to become just the way it is. And we'll be habituated to being curtailed and in speech and in movement and in other means of self-determination. So I'm going to say that at some point, people are going to have guts. It's going to take serious courage. And if they don't have the guts, they're going to basically put themselves in a straitjacket and their progeny as well. Somebody's got to fight this. And I don't mean this collectively, but you know, as individuals, and then not to be on the side of the horde that's ready and willing to punish transgressors because this is part of the way that totalitarianism works, is by enrolling people into the roles of surveiller, of punisher, of mob attacker. This is how it doesn't work without that. There's no way it works without that. So defiance is going to be a key, and it's going to take serious guts. And you might be standing out there alone in some cases, but you're going to have the fortitude to do so. Somebody has to trailblaze here. Without trailblazers, we're going to have no trail, and there'll be nothing to follow. So, I mean, I do believe in leaders, and I think leadership is important. You know, I'm not some sort of egalitarian that suggests that, you know, this is a leaderless society. I don't believe that at all. I think leaders are necessary, and leaders are the ones that provide examples that others can follow behind, and asserting their rights, asserting their self-determination. And this means in the civic sphere, in the economic sphere, in the intellectual sphere, etc.
Yeah, it's and I think there's a lot of people popping up and pushing back, and it's really interesting to watch them.
Yes, there are.
And they're just like absolutely demonized.
Yeah.
Dogs are attacking me. But yeah, it's I mean, a lot of people might find this to be kind of an extreme example, but I look to, there's some people that I really respect in regards to fighting back against Nazi Germany, whether that would be two that come to mind is Corrie ten Boom, who hid Jewish people and ended up going to the concentration camps as a result of it, and then also Friedrich Bonhoeffer, who died in prison for speaking out against the Nazi regime. And I think there's something that is just really powerful. I forgot where I heard this. I heard this earlier in the week, but there was a professor that was talking about the importance of stepping outside of indoctrination and fighting against the propaganda. And so one of the things
maybe Mark Crispin Miller, or was that him? Mark Crispin Miller?
I don't know. It was on a podcast, but I probably couldn't name his name. But it was a guy referencing a Southern professor. But one of the things he would always ask his class is, how many of you would have been abolitionists, you know, earlier on in our country's history? And, you know, everybody raises their hands. And then he asks, why was the majority of the country not abolitionist? Why was that such a minority if all of you are raising your hands right now? And I thought that was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, the way to determine whether you would have been a Nazi cooperator or a dissident or a Stalinist cooperator or dissident or an abolitionist or a it's conformity. The question is whether you're what is your tolerance for nonconformity? How much conformity are you willing to how conformist are you right now in terms of the present conditions? Are you so conformist that you're afraid to speak up about some of these absurd claims that are being made, that are being foisted on us, so the key about totalitarian ideology is not so much to make you believe it, but to demoralize you so much that you can't even, that you're afraid to speak up about what you do know to be true. So it's not necessarily that you actually imbibe the ideology directly, but the demoralization campaign is severe. And so how much do you have the guts to non-conform in the current conditions against what is totalitarian in its character? If you don't have that guts, then likely you would have been a Nazi cooperator. You would have been a Stalinist, good Stalinist subject. You would have been likely a good slave supporting citizen. So yeah, that's the key.
Yeah, and I think one of the really hard things about this is the way that the argument is being formulated, that being they're kind of supporting these totalitarian measures is actually a fight back against the establishment. And I think that's where,
yeah, it's a stunning reversal to me, in my way of thinking, having come from the left, to see leftists embracing the dominant totalitarian corporate sponsored, state-sponsored ideological formation and thinking that they're radicals in doing so. Imagining that they're opposing something like they're opposing the dominant when they're absolutely foot soldiers for it. Absolutely, like I've said before, that they have the left, they're marionettes on a string, on strings being manipulated by their corporate puppet masters, and they have no idea that that's what's happening. It's apparently, or else they are fine with it because they think, well, we'll get them someday. But I noticed that a lot of the left likes to have no problem with, like, for example, big conglomerate businesses, but they have a real problem with small businesses for some reason. Okay. They have no problem with mega powerful corporate apparatuses, but they have real problem with a singular individual stating what they think. That's at variance. So they have no problem with Amazon selling you everything under the sun, but they have a real problem if you try to huck some wares online. It's really curious. So I think that's there is a tendency for the left to actually favor monopolization, because what, after all, is socialism but monopoly? It's the monopolization of everything, production, but also ideological and cultural, social, educational. Every sort of realm is under the thumb of one regime, one party, one regime. So we're headed towards the possibility of a singular party rule here in the U.S. And I'm not speaking here as a partisan so much as a very alarmed observer who sees the possibility that we could have a singular party. And this isn't even, now there are those who say, well, it's always been one, two wings of the same bird. Well, there were at least two wings. Now we're talking about a single rocket engine. It won't be divisible at all. There'll be no way to even have a choice if this continues.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I have come to see things, and my general focus is on fixing the money. And I feel like if we fix the money, we're able to fix a lot of the issues that we see in society. So like the ever growing of government, they can tax us explicitly and continue to raise taxes, but they can also tax us through inflation, which is very covert. And one of the crazy things that we're seeing is like all these local governments are going broke or have been broke for a while. It's kind of hitting a breaking point. where they're having to turn to banks and the Federal Reserve to fund them. And I just don't see like the ability to increase tax revenues to pay for their deficits as being a thing. And I feel like when we get to that point, one, there's where they're not relying on tax revenue to grow, and they can just print, they can endlessly grow. And then two, they're no longer, I mean, the idea of democracy is the government being accountable to people. And I see that as not really being a thing for a while, and growing less and less of a thing in the future. And so yeah.
Definitely. I think inflation is going to be a major crushing. I mean, there's no way that it could be warded off much longer. And it's already going on, but it's seemingly being somehow disguised. I really don't know how. I'm not a financial expert, but I do think that inflation is going to become like a massive boulder on our backs, because you can't just keep printing money like this. And this is not real money, you know, so I can understand why people have been investing in cryptocurrencies and things like that, because at least it's not hinged on total inflationary printing and reproduction of a completely faux currency.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I talk about Bitcoin a lot on the podcast, and that's kind of what the theme of it is. And I think one of the most attractive parts about Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant and it's peer-to-peer digital cash. So you can self-custody, which is impossible to do with government fiat currency today in its current form, and probably always will be impossible. But yeah, both of those things are, and what you talked about, not being debased by the government, like all of those things are really empowering. And I see that as a solution forward for a lot of people.
Yes. I think that cryptocurrency plus a kind of new cottage industrial cottage industry movement, where people everybody has to become an entrepreneur of some sort. If you're not an entrepreneur, you're a slave. And likely it'd be best off to be an entrepreneur who's doing business with a currency that's real, that hasn't got a fake imprimatur on it that's basically without value eventually. So, you know, Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies or other types of direct exchange are the only way probably forward for. And I think you're right. I think once you have an economic base and a sturdy economic base, this becomes the vehicle for rights to be asserted, because you're not worried about being canceled. You can't be canceled from yourself. And you have a network of people that are also uncancelable. The more uncancelable people we have, the greater power we'll have to assert ourselves individually and as a kind of network. I don't like to say collectively because I hate collectives, but as a network.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a point that gives me a lot of hope for the future. One of the most terrifying things that I heard, I mean, the monetary system is already extremely terrifying if you really break it down, but there's this idea, it's coming soon, but central bank digital currencies. And one of the ideas that was presented in it was that they would be able to tax on any transaction and just pull directly out because they have control of the currency. Whereas like today you have to like, there's steps.
There's steps, there's gaps. You can justify write-offs, and you can do different things. You can cheat, you know, which I don't recommend, but you know, you can. Whereas there'll be no cheating, and except on their part, that will get everything coming to them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's the perfect monopoly.
Yeah. It's that people don't recognize this, you know, how this digital currency would be solidifying the monopoly over people. It would be an enormous blow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah. And one of the, jumping back to something that we talked about earlier. So you talked about the idea of red pilling. I call it orange pilling because I talk about Bitcoin as like the on-ramp to free thought, but and self-sovereignty.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, the way you were describing it, it almost sounded like, you know, to help people out of that mindset, it's like helping them leave a cult.
Yes,
Like,
it's very much like leaving a cult. I would say that's right, but it may take professionals. I don't have the knowledge base to debrief somebody and to de-indoctrinate them from a cult. Although I do have recommendations how to prevent getting into one,
mm-hmm.
how to ward it off. But that's kind of more preventative than it is, kind of what in medical terms that would be, curative. I'm not sure how to cure it, but I do think I have good ideas about how to prevent it.
Yeah, I think people are especially vulnerable right now to those types of mindsets, and to the propaganda, because they're isolated, probably in struggling financially, just
yes. It's a lot easier to believe that the state and that the extensions of the state have your best, they're honest, that they're telling the truth, and that they have your interest at stake. It's much more comforting to believe that. It's much less difficult to maintain than it is to maintain what amounts to an amazing difficulty in trying to stay immunized and to stay resistant to this. It's like a virus is really what it's like. The real virus that we're dealing with is ideological.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One word I like to call it is that I've heard a lot is the fiat disease. In the way
the fiat disease.
Yeah, it informs.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, one question that, one thing that I've been looking at, specifically because the U.S. sometimes can be hostile regulatory or with the regulations against Bitcoin, is looking for other jurisdictions to potentially move to. Do you feel like there's any government in the world that's really doing it right now?
I don't know. I wouldn't go anywhere in Europe. You can get some reprieve in some Latin American countries, I think. But it isn't really a solution. It's really just a reprieve. They're less repressive because they have less resources to be repressive. So, I have friends that have become expats and have moved to places like Costa Rica, Honduras, and stuff like that, because the state is just less on you all the time. There's a gap. There's more of a gap between what they're able to undertake, and it gives you more latitude. So I would say some South American countries, but there's nothing right now. There's nothing even approaching utopian, nothing like that. But they're better. I don't want to give up the fight. I've been offered to move there to Costa Rica, for example. A friend has said, "Listen, I got a place. Here's your spot. You'll have a huge space of your own. We could rent out or buy a house there easily." But I don't want to give up the fight here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a standpoint that I've had too, because I feel like this battle is really, really important. It's not one. It's one that's universal. I've been reading the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, recently, which is kind of a fun one. But I don't know if I'd call it fun. It's more depressing, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
It's fun and depressing at the same time.
I like depressing books myself.
Yeah,
Because when I read other people's horrific and, the horrific imaginary or otherwise conditions that people are under, it gives you a relief, because you recognize that this is something that's been dealt with universally in human history, and you're not alone, and also it could be worse. And so it's relieving. It's actually relieving. It gives you sort of a reprieve from your own state. I try to do that with my novel Thought Criminal, not to plug that so directly, but I am an intellectual entrepreneur, so I have to. But Thought Criminal is like that. It's very, very, things just keep getting narrower and narrower for the characters, and there seems to be no way out ever, but they manage to find loopholes here and there, and that's basically, I think it's the same kind of read that you're talking about. Tell me more about that book.
Yeah, so it's on the history of the Federal Reserve. So it starts out with, it just really breaks down the monetary system really well. It starts out with kind of the conspiracy of creating the Federal Reserve, and it was definitely a conspiracy. They met in secret and, worked
Yeah, where
really
did they
hard.
go? They went down to some island off the coast of,
Yep.
Was it
Jekyll Island. Yeah.
Jekyll Island, yeah.
I mean, it's just a creepy sounding island.
Just right there. I mean, yeah. Could they have made it any more like sci-fi horror?
Yeah.
In effect.
Well, it was. I mean, they had 6 people that represented like a quarter of the world's wealth, all gathered on an island, dictating, the future of the, the world monetary system pretty much. And, 1912, I think it was. But yeah, one of the ideas presented in the book is that central banking is inherently totalitarian and socialist, and that with any attempt to fight back against it that doesn't address those issues is going to be kind of short-sighted. And so that's one of the big reasons why I don't really care much for the current president is he's bashing the drum of negative interest rates and buddy with the Fed, and it's like, come on, man, like you're not really pushing for any sort of change, or
it's nothing substantive.
Yeah.
For him, I think in his case, I think it's more of symbolic for some people. It's a symbolic leaf that he's basically holding out, and people are holding out hope that leaf represents something.
Yeah. So yeah, what's your favorite book that you've written? I know you've written quite a few.
Well, I gotta say that looking at the last 4, which is the last 4 which I wrote in the last 2 years, since the break, let's call it that, is the first one, Springtime for Snowflakes, is actually probably the best literary wise. The writing is the best. It's probably the best writing, but I'm very proud of that. But Google Archipelago, I think, is the most important one in terms of the argument and what it's getting at. It's a difficult argument, so the book might feel disjointed to people, and I've been told that by a couple readers, but mostly nobody complains too much, because I'm piecing together a lot of difficult things. Like you're just talking about these, these 6 of the world's wealthiest people representing a quarter of the world's wealth, effectively setting up socialism, right, through central banking. This kind of concept that socialism will blow the left's mind. They can't get a handle on that. Why is that social? That's not socialism. That's capitalism. That's capitalism at its worst. Blah blah blah. So I've been trying to poke at that question, and I call it corporate socialism. These super oligarchs have an interest in a socialist society, and it's very difficult for people to get a handle on that. Apparently, maybe for you it's easy because you were never indoctrinated into leftism, but
I was a
So
little
many
bit.
people. Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah. I grew up just north of Chicago. I got my fair dose of
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about? You
Yeah.
sort of, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would have never thought that. You know, I mean, the general consensus is that the left represents the worker and breaking up monopolies and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
the right is the rich people's party.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way that I saw it. I mean, I would always applaud taxes, you know, because I was like, oh yeah, we need more money for these things. It just makes
Mhm, mhm.
sense. And then it wasn't until I started diving into economics and seeing like that. I've worked in social work for like 7 years, and to see the difference between one to see like how corrupt that industry is, and then to
Mhm.
see it all getting consolidated and monopolistic, and the way that they just prey on people.
Preying on them, and they're keeping them captive. They're
Yeah.
totally debilitating these people. It's
Mhm.
like a captive colonies, right? Like they create this colony of effective lepers in a way.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they're contagious. I mean, I just mean they're making them incapacitated in some sense,
Mhm.
and then they're invested in maintaining that incapacitation.
Yeah, it's just it. I don't really know what. I mean, I feel like I moved out to Arizona when I was 17, and bought my first gun at 18, and kind of embraced the right side of things. But, you know, after seeing the Patriot Act and George Bush and,
Oh yeah,
you
well
know,
that's a whole different. Yeah, that's
yeah,
a big animal of rightism. That's horrendous.
yeah, yeah, it's just, it, at the end of the day, like my goal is I want to see like the most prosperous society that I can. You know, I care about my community a lot. You know, I care about people in vulnerable positions, and I want to see them empowered. And I think that it's very, very apparent that socialism is not going to do those things, and never
Oh
has
yeah.
and never will. And so and I think libertarian thought ultimately is. I mean, one of the things you talked about is like, you know, our future, everybody needs to become an entrepreneur, or else, you know, they'll just be slaves to their employers. And we're seeing that it's
Mhm.
everybody's a slave to their employer. You know, they're living paycheck to paycheck. If they lose their job, it's a crisis. And
Mhm.
the biggest obstacles to doing that are taxes and regulations that make it
Yeah.
harder. And
Yes, absolutely. Taxes and regulations. Taxes which take so much of your money so that you can invest in your own production capacities. Regulations which make the cost of entry so high. Every type of way to trammel and keep people into, what I consider a permanent low class, permanent slave class, if you will, which is actually being undertaken by um, and with the use of kind of socialist ideology and socialist programs. Interestingly enough, right?
yeah,
So once you get this kind of a breakthrough, but it takes it. It's obviously a big, shall we say, it's a gestalt shift
mm-hmm.
that you have to undergo, and you can't impart this to anybody else. It has to happen to them. So I don't know what else to say to them, because like you were saying, how did we unpeel, red pill or orange pill, if you will, these other people? You can't impart this. This is insights that you can't give somebody. You can't really lend it to them. You can't really convince them of it through argumentation. Something has to break within their own consciousness, and everything that you've been taught, like left is this, right is that, left is for the little guy, the right, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. I mean, it's hard to get this across, but it's all wrong.
Yeah, it's like teaching everybody that the earth is still flat. Is the way that I mean, I've been really trying to be open-minded to different schools of economic thought outside of the Austrian school.
Sure.
And it's really difficult because it's just so counterintuitive now, like to listen to modern monetary theory, just the nonsense that they build on top of.
Right.
Yeah,
It's the premises that are so flawed, and then they just build all these edifices on top of these flawed premises, and then it becomes establishment, and then it basically has the right of way because it's established. You know, it doesn't have any real credentials or justification for its existence other than it is. You know, other than that's what has dominated. Its dominance is really the only thing that it has going for it. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I love to do is break things down to first principles. So I just had Alex Gladstein on the podcast, and he works for the Human Rights Organization. And so one of the things I had him break down right off the bat, because there's a misconception on what human rights are, is what are human rights, and then like things like breaking down money to first principles, because there's so many assumptions that we build upon. And
right. Now people think it's a human right to have health care, for example, which is absurd. I mean, you don't have a right to enslave somebody, do you? So, I mean, how could you have a right to health care? You don't have a right to health care. You have a right to get it if you want it. I mean, if it exists, but you don't have a right to health insurance, to health care insurance. I mean, that's like a right. Yeah. So what did he say were the basic human rights?
Well, one of the things he talked about, he was stating that things like healthcare and stuff like that are entitlements. Whereas human rights would be kind of referring back to the Bill of Rights. So like freedom of speech, freedom of self-protection. I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy about our society is like the erosion of property rights through like civil asset forfeiture. And I mean, 2020 has been absolutely astounding and just blowing apart just the silliness of the whole system. Like, looking at Breonna Taylor, where cops just burst into her house and shot her when she was sleeping. Like, just the absolute absurdity of that, the ability of the state to encroach on individuals. And just like, I mean, property taxes is one of the silliest things I've ever heard of, because of the idea of, I mean, to some degree it makes sense. Like if the property taxes were going towards like protection of your property, I think that would make sense, but it's really not. They're like, go to fund schools and all sorts of other things. It goes
to fund repressive apparatuses.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be interesting, what they're moving to now is wealth tax, and that's going to be even more encroaching. In other words, you won't be taxed on income, but you'll be taxed on what you have on an annual or otherwise even perhaps more frequent basis.
Yeah.
Just for owning things, you're going to be taxed, not for having bought them. Not when you buy them, but always, like they do in some states for cars, which I found abysmal. They could tax you every year for owning a car. What?
Yeah.
But now this is in Biden's plans apparently to establish a wealth tax, because after all, equalization is the key. That's what they want. Equal misery for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good one. Andrew Yang was really interesting. He talked about how the wealth tax is almost impossible to actually implement. And I think part of the reason why is, we have a two-tiered society where you have normal people and then you've got the wealthy. And the wealthy have special privileges because they can pay for asset protection, and they can get around it, Like Donald
Right.
Trump's tax returns, or I don't know if they're real or not, but you know, the idea of him paying less taxes compared to like average people or whatever the narrative is, it just shows that there's that two-tier system, because I can't afford for that. So that's
Once you can buy your way into not having to pay taxes, like Amazon can move into different areas and they don't have to pay property taxes or local taxes, so they can get off the ground. And then you got the small business owner down the street with a one-door operation has to pay everything that Amazon is exempted from.
Yep.
It's a travesty.
I mean, one of the most egregious things that I learned about this year was payroll taxes. So the way that payroll taxes work, from my minimal understanding, I didn't even know what they were until Trump was tweeting about cutting them. But the idea of like each employee getting taxed, but the tax, instead of placed coming out of the employee's paycheck, it comes from the employer, and then it gets capped.
Yeah.
And then it gets capped. So like, it's such an unfair system of, one, you know, you're punishing employers for employing people. Two, it's really a tax on the employee that they never see. And then three, you know, it benefits the larger businesses at expense to the smaller businesses. And it's just, I don't know.
It gets capped. They have a cap on their end, but there's no cap on the employee end, in fact, except for the highest rate, you know, but they don't have a cap as such. No, it's just a rate. You can't get a higher rate, but there's no cap. Yeah, it's the way the state enables monopolization, or, you know, not monopolies de facto, de jure, but de facto monopolization. You know, I'm getting to the point where I'm 60, I'll be 62 years old. And I'm angry that I have paid all this Social Security money and now I have to basically beg to get it back, which is total bullshit. You know, give me the money right now that I paid and I should have had the whole time anyway. But since you have it, why can't I get the whole amount back at this moment, which I could use, you know, to create business, you know? It's just, it's a travesty. I don't need a nanny state to take my money and then dole it back to me in little dribbles.
Hopefully you're not looking for a pension too, because those are looking pretty bad.
I have a little bit of money left in that, and it's not a pension. It's just a lockdown investment right now. Yeah, I'm not looking to even touch that.
Yeah, I got a call today from a friend who was, you know, really concerned about the Fed's actions and whatever. But we had a long conversation where he was telling me he had never had any exposure to Bitcoin before, and he's telling me that he's going to pull all of his money out of his 401k and put it into Bitcoin. And I thought that was pretty incredible.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I can see the move. I can see why you might do it. I have a friend that's very heavily invested in the stock market, and I've been trying to encourage her to get it out of there because I don't believe it's going to hold up, and I think there's going to be a big shedding going on pretty soon. You know?
Yeah, and that's one thing too, is like another paradigm shift that I suggest for people to do is to start pricing things like the stock market and gold, you know, instead of pricing it in the dollar. And then you can just see that the returns aren't that great.
Right. Against gold. Yeah. You're not, because with inflation, what you're getting is, you think you're getting a return, but against what currency, you know? If you're getting a return against garbage, what you got is more garbage, you know?
Definitely not beating Bitcoin.
Right.
Since its inception, the stock market has never outperformed Bitcoin. Not that like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but yeah. Where are some good places that people can follow your work? I know you've got a lot of good stuff on YouTube. And
Well, everything I try to keep everything collected as much as possible on my website. So in some cases, to find my talks and stuff, it's easier to find it directly on YouTube than it is to go parsing down the page where I have everything listed. Because I can't put every video up as a video, I just put the link to it. But michaelrectenwald.com is where all of my work is. Not all of it. There's a lot of stuff from the past that I've jettisoned and I don't link to anymore. You know, I have a few remnants of my socialist days on there just for old time's sake. So
Nice.
if people want to see the evolution, they can see that. But michaelrectenwald.com, and I have a bunch of pages on there. There's all my media, all my essays, not all of them, but you know, my essays, my media appearances, my books, links to my books, and I also sell my books. They come, obviously they're on Amazon, but I sell directly off of my website bookstore, Apogee Books, and then I sell directly to people. I sign the copies for them and write notes and stuff. So I keep a little cottage industry of book sales that way, and everything's there, including pictures of my readers. I like to keep everybody feeling like they're part of it. They're part of what I'm trying to do.
yeah, I definitely look forward to, I'm going to buy Thought Criminal right after this and read that.
Oh, thank you. Right.
And I love the title, Springtime for Snowflakes. I think that's so funny.
People think it's not a serious book because the title is funny, but it's
Yeah.
a damn serious book.
Yeah.
The left try to dismiss it because of the title, you know,
Yeah.
but the title is catchy and so it works. But once you get the book, you see it's a serious book.
Yeah. I see you got the infamous Tucker Carlson, the infamous Tucker Carlson interview here that got you canceled.
Yeah, well, that was already being canceled when I did that interview.
Yeah.
That was sort of in the interim while they were trying to cancel me, while they were driving me to the margins of the university and trying to wreck my academic career. I think by that point, they had already moved me to the Russian department and stuck me in my own personal gulag. Seriously, it was like a complete Siberia they put me in effect. Totally isolate me from everybody. Yeah, I've been on there a couple times. I've been around on the media, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really good having you on, Michael. I really appreciate the conversation.
I appreciate it. I
helpful.
learned from you too. I learned some things from you, and I like hearing what you have to think, what you have to say. It's great to talk to you.
Awesome. That was a really fun conversation, and yeah, it's a growing issue. The amount of control that the state and these tech giants have over our lives, whether it's social media or Google, and their ability to really sway people's opinions and create realities. And it was really interesting listening to him talk about a lot of these ideologies being like a religion or a cult, because in a lot of ways they are. They inform the way that people see the world, and to be suggested anything different, even if it could be radically better, is kind of mind-boggling to some people. And I think that's why Bitcoin, is such a strange concept to people, because people have no idea what good money could be like. Yeah, it was a fun conversation. He's got good stuff all over the place. Like his YouTube videos of him speaking are definitely good things to watch. And yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of Plato's allegory of the cave, where now once you see it, you can't unsee it. But the problem is so many people are living stuck in the cave. And the ultimate goal, I think, of most people, talking about these different things is they want to see a prosperous society. And these ideas of like state growth is problematic, and standing in front of that, because you centralize all the wealth, you centralize all the power, you centralize all the control over information, and what do you get? You get a society that isn't that prosperous. It's prosperous for a few people. It's exactly what we see happening today. So if you're pushing back against it, which is always a good thing when you hear new ideas, just take the time to like really research and hear out what these perspectives are talking about. If you like what I'm doing with the podcast, I'd love to chat. Always open to chatting. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Patreon, you can support me on Patreon for $1 a month, but you don't have to do that for us to chat. You can reach out to me on Twitter. That would be probably the best way to reach out to me. I spend a lot of time on there, despite it being kind of a toxic place, because there's some pretty good, smart people like Michael who are posting truth bombs every day. But yeah, thanks for listening.